If you think in the purpose, suddenly more possibilities came across. If you don't think on the purpose, you just want to connect one system to other, and it's very strict and reduced. So it's more opening the possibilities around it.
You take this capability it can be used in many different ways, and then you just use it to your needs. And it doesn't have to be exactly like the people that design it, they thought about it, but you have new possibilities, new things, and you can expand a lot on top of that.
Yes, everybody wants to do API. They see the power of the APIs, but they understand APIs more like interconnections in between systems and not with the purpose way.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of API Resilience. This is a podcast that we've been doing here at Pronovix with people from the API industry, and we're discussing various topics, trying to get kind of a boots on the ground view of what people are doing, especially given the strange times that we have found ourselves living through. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to two API managers from Lufthansa Airlines. And please welcome Ainhoa Pulido.
Hi. Pulido, yeah. Okay, great. Hi, Mark. Hi, Kristof.
Thank you for joining us. And Flavio Geraldes.
Hello. Thank you for inviting us.
Doing great, Mark.
And I'm going to, I always struggle with names, and as much as I practice them, I actually should do a practice session before we start recording so that I don't struggle with the names as much. But Flavio and Ainhoa, it's really great to have you with us today. And I'm sorry for butchering your names. And
it's okay. Thank you for inviting us.
Really excited to have you.
Yeah, we too, for being here.
So we go way back. Like I know Flavio from when you were still at Vodafone. Like it must be like 5 years or something almost.
Yeah, maybe not.
It seems eternity.
Maybe. I mean, time goes fast.
Time goes fast. And I met you, Ainhoa, in Frankfurt at the Dev Portal meetup that Deutsche Bank organized. Like just before the lockdown, that was my last live event.
Me too. I remember it was like the 5th of March or something like that. And in the next week they, But
I remember being afraid. There was one guy who was sneezing. And it was like, and I was sitting next to him during dinner. And I was afraid.
I can't even remember meeting people in person. It's been too long.
Yeah, mostly a year. This is crazy.
It's almost a year.
Yeah.
So and in 2020 years, that's like a decade. So we know each other. We go way back. And it's been interesting to see because I've seen. We had a really interesting conversation in Frankfurt that I'd love to follow up today on the podcast. And then also Flavio, you've been putting out some really interesting blog posts about some of the philosophy of the API world, what does this all mean, and why are we doing this, and how do we make it really be useful and beneficial for organizations? So, and then I found out that the two of you are colleagues, which was kind of cool. So I was like, okay, so maybe we should just have this call together.
Yeah,
I'm really happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, remember that conversation too that day, and I was so impacted that you like it because I'm an IT girl, but I also a coach girl. So this topic that I bring was more the purpose of API, and some people find it kind of weird, and then you get excited about that. I say, okay, great, I'm not the only one.
No.
that thinks that way. And so it was very nice to find another person that thinks that mostly in the same way. So, yeah.
I think so. Let's kick the conversation off there. Let's go into the the thing we started talking before we open up the recording. Let's go into that a little bit. So the reason why I got excited about that was because I'm a bioengineer by education.
For the record, state what it was that you got excited about.
Okay. So I got excited about thinking about the purpose of APIs. So like thinking about designing APIs from a perspective of an API needs to have a purpose. And the reason why I got excited about that was because I come from a biotech background. So I studied bioengineering, and I've been looking for ways to get inspiration from the biology world for the API world. And there's a lot. There's like lots and lots. It's amazing. And one of the key things I'm a lot busy with is APIs as a systems boundary, or APIs as a system, as a boundary signal system. Very, very similar to living systems, where you have a cell wall and you have receptors on the outside of the cell wall, and then through this evolutionary model, you get the decoupling of what happens inside of the cell and what happens in the rest of the body, and so that a cell can fulfill its function without the body having to say like, hey, cell, it's time you start cranking up the volume or something like that. It's just self-organizing. And I think this is a very, very powerful metaphor for what's happening in the API world. Now, why I got excited was because one of the key things I'm also interested in is what is life really, and what makes a cell a living system. And I think that is a lot about purpose. And it's about a system that has the purpose to just stay going and keep going. And so when you started talking about purpose, it was like, bling, signal boundary or signal boundary systems, purpose, there's a connection here. So that's why I got excited. And so that's the background. But maybe can you explain a little bit about what you
was
meant with that?
Yeah, there for me was like I came to the API world and knowing and investigating a little about this and APIs and that, I see it that it was very important when we want to teach others how to build APIs, if they stop thinking about them like just interfaces that connect one system to other to throw information. So I find, because I came from the coaching and stuff, like when we give a person a purpose, like seems like their life is more interesting and change something. And they say, okay, so probably this is the key thing. And say, okay, what is the purpose of APIs? What do you want to achieve? And when we began to ask these questions, people get less in the technical thing and goes more for where they want to go with this, what is behind, what they look for. And that makes totally a different vision of the API. And for us, it's more like what we were looking for. It's like, because the information could be the same, but the purpose could be totally different. And for that, probably you create different APIs because the purpose is totally different. And we have some examples there, but yes, it was mostly that, to make people more easy to get into the business driving thinking than in the technical. I just give me I make a REST code and you give me these headers and then I do something. So it was just for bringing that.
I would say it's a little bit of a way to try to change the mindset. I mean,
yeah.
I cannot speak for everyone, but I still see quite a lot that if we're talking with technical people, there's still this tendency of, okay, this is the database schema that I have. So I want to give away this data. I'm going to build an API with the same schema, basically. But that is not what we would call an API product, right? That's a technical interface that can connect systems. But no one that will want to consume that will well, no one will want to consume that because they're just looking at the internals of your problems. If you switch this, if you think, okay, what is the purpose of the API I'm building? Who is going to consume it? What are they going to do with the data I'm offering? What do they need? Do they need all the data that I have in my database? Probably not. So you think about the purpose of the outside of your customer, and you build according to this. And maybe you end up with one API that can support different purposes, or maybe you end up understanding, okay, maybe I need more than one API because the purpose is so different, the concepts, the context behind it is so different that I need more than one.
And it's also, if you make it purpose-built and that you are understanding the business need that is being addressed, then you're going to make it far easier to consume that interface. Yes. Because if you just put an interface on top of your data model and said, here is the data, go for it, the way that people have to kind of grok the data model and what they could do with it is a totally different set of, it's a totally different problem than what could be much more easily solved if you gave them an interface specifically for the thing that they're trying to do.
And also open up like possibilities. Because if you think in the purpose, suddenly more possibilities came across. If you don't think on the purpose, you just want to connect one system to other, and it's very strict and reduced. So it's more opening the possibilities around it.
San, I think this is the rub that I feel a little bit, and I want to see how, like, well, we're all on the same page, but I think one of the key things that an API needs to offer is the ability to surprise you. So like as the API owner, and you're never getting surprised by what people are doing with your API, then probably it's not a full success, I would say, like purely from a theoretical perspective or philosophical perspective. I think an API needs to be able to surprise you because people do unexpected things with it. Because if they don't do unexpected things, you've probably made it too narrow. And I think a good parallel in the biology is like hormones. Like depending on what cell you're talking about, like you're going to have different cells putting the hormones into the system. You're going to have different cells reacting very differently depending on what kind of cell it is, with on the same receptors or on different receptors. So like the same message that is being put out there is going to trigger very different behaviors in different places. And I think this is how APIs need to work, is that they're a central information infrastructure that connects the whole system together, but the reaction of the system is not predetermined. And the system needs to be able to evolve to react differently depending on what the system requires. So if you need more cells, I don't know, you move to a cold country, you need more cells to keep yourself warm, like you need more fat cells or something, then it's going to trigger different behavior. And I think that's, so it's the purpose of an API is not the same as the purpose of an interface or like an end user interface. It's something in between. It's like the purpose needs to be an information infrastructure purpose or something like that.
Yes or no? I mean, I agree with you, but also I'm not sure if I fully agree with you. You were saying that, and I was thinking about domain-driven design. And I mean, I'm not an expert, but I can think about an example that we have in Lufthansa. If you go around and you ask 3 people what they understand by the word flight, you will get 4 different answers. Because the concepts and the implications of that is so different that they just simply cannot cope with what the other departments or even sometimes different companies understand from the same concept. So yeah, I do agree that maybe, I don't know, maybe we could think about APIs as an object, right? A representation of an object, especially if we talk about REST, right? A flight is a flight, and you have this object, you get the properties of the object. But if people cannot understand it, then they will also not use it. So maybe depending if you are talking about the crew in the sky or the people in maintenance, they have different understandings of the same object. So you have to represent it probably slightly different.
So I think the way that I see it is if we try to tease out what we're talking about here on the end where Kristof says, if you're not being surprised by innovations that people are creating from your APIs, then you've over-constrained the system. I liken this to in software development, whenever the business person comes to the developer and they don't explain their problem. Instead, they say, I'd like a red button that does X. And they get a red button that does X, and it can't do anything else. But what is much better is this middle ground where the business person explains the business rules, what they're trying to accomplish, and the developer opens up more affordances for them. And this isn't building something that you're not going to need, because there's the agile principle of Yagni. You aren't going to need it. This is the idea of providing the right level of constraint. And so this is that middle ground that we're talking about is the good place to be, not hyper constrained. And the other extreme is where we started with the idea that it's not very useful to just put an interface on top of your data model and say, here's my data.
Because then it's also hyper constrained. It's hyper constrained by your data model, which is completely crazy, because that's not useful at all. Yeah.
So finding that balance, I think, can be more difficult in some ways on an API.
For our, the way that I see when we talk about the purpose as API managers in Lufthansa was, for example, I remember when one project came, they want to expose some information related to the passenger in the plane. It's called PIL, and as Flavio say, it's not a pill as a drug, it's the acronym that we have for passenger information list. And they came and they want to put everything together and create an API from there and use it for different purpose. And we say, but what do you really want to achieve? And they say, well, we want to bring more information in this already API that is existing, that is a rival pill API, because they already exist for the crew. And we want to use it now for the customers too, for bringing some information specialized for the customer. And we say, but then the purpose is different. What the purpose that crew has related to this list is totally different from what you want to present to the customer. And in that, we just convince them that because the purpose is different, because we don't even know what they want to do to the customer. So I like your idea that we create something to bring innovation. So we just convince them to separate it and create another API, more customer focused, that it has kind of the same root. Both of them comes from the same place, but we separate it in the context of crew and operations during the flight and customer service that you are giving. And I'm willing to know what they are going to build on them, the surprise effect. But once it's there, we give them the opportunity to bring ideas of what to use with that information to the customer.
Yeah, I think that is the key. Like, you do need to have some sort of intent. Yeah, it's just an interesting question. It just that's a nice little friction where it's like,
to find the balance. No,
we're learning something here. Yeah,
not constraints and not being too generic. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I tend to think of the APIs that are less purpose-built as being very noisy and messy versus someone who says, this is elegant. It's elegant because they've done the work to actually expose the data in a way that can be used in different ways without all of the extra noise that you would get from just taking raw data dumps. There's a lot of value in I mean, their entire business is built around aggregating data and transforming the data into something useful. The utility was, might have already been there, but until someone does the work to expose it, the affordance wasn't there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like an arm, like without the bone, the muscle doesn't do anything. Like you can just it just flubbers there. And it's the bone that actually is the constraint that allows you to perform work. And I think it's very similar. The constraint of the API, a really good API, constrains the information that flows through it in just the right way so that it can perform maximum work. And then, is it a generic tool that can, do a whole bunch of different affordances? Or is it a very specific tool that can only do one job? I guess there's probably a place for both. Like just like a tool builder, you might have like one really specialized tool that only works for that one single job, but it's just such an important job for you that you just need to make it so constrained so you can do it really, really, really well. But then you have like very generic tools where it's like, I can do whatever I need to do with this tool.
I guess the balance is what's difficult to achieve, right? That's where the magic is. I mean, with your example of biology, the entire body needs blood to get the oxygen to make the organs work, but you're not going to tell the kidney to suddenly start pumping the blood, right? Because that's not its job. So you have to communicate the right thing to the right place.
Yep.
This is really interesting. I'm kind of like to steer where we're at and focus it in a slightly different direction. I'd like to understand how Lufthansa is thinking about APIs, what your aspirations are for the program, what you want, how the company is looking at APIs, how you're looking at APIs, and where you're hoping to go in terms of your digital transformation with APIs.
Okay, Flavio, you want to go or I go?
Go ahead, you can start.
Okay, for us, I see in every slide of the board members APIs in everywhere. So I think Lufthansa is committed to do APIs. The thing is, do they really understand what is behind the API word? Because yes, it helps to transform the company. And it's not only saying and putting in a PowerPoint. It has to be really a purpose, like we talk about purpose, but a purpose driving this API for what, and understand the what and the why your company is choosing to use APIs is what is gonna really drive an API program or not. So we are trying more to convince around the why this is important and how they need to do it and the best way to do it. Because my sense is more like, yes, everybody wants to do API. They see the power of the APIs, but they understand APIs more like interconnections in between systems and not with the purpose way and the product way, not productizing it. Mm-hmm. And that is more our challenge and where we want to go and try to convince, and is our role, trying to convince the whole company that when you think in another way, more in this way that we are proposing them, it's going to bring really, really a good results in the company. Because
I would say focusing maybe a bit more on our work. So our idea is to build or bring ecosystem to be able to power this strategy, this idea that Ainhoa mentioned, right? So enable all our other colleagues to collaborate through the APIs, right? So if you have one team that is already working on some objects, I mean, I'm not going to say flight or whatever, if some other team, the crew, the maintenance, if they need that, they should be able to reuse these concepts, these objects. And that's where we are trying to go, having this community that in IT that can share and can build on each other works to try, well, first of all, reducing costs, because these are difficult times, but also hopefully at some point starts building more and more on top and coming up with new ideas and collaborate more.
And with the environment, that ecosystem that Flavio has told it that we are trying to build up, things is more for making their lives more easy. So if someone already have thought about your API and already exists, they know that it's there and they can reuse it, and how easy it is to ask for reusing it and that kind of thing. So that we are focusing more on that, seeing that now everybody wants to build APIs. It's like having more like, okay, let's show up what APIs are there, also how good they are, because this is important. It's like we also categorize them like really good APIs with a purpose driving or something like that, or just connection, and giving also like for what is this API and how you can ask for permission to use it or not. So that is more what we are working on that.
So I think, like, before we got started, the way I like to put it into airplane language, like if you're flying by wire, you don't wire the computer straight to the machine. Like, it's not the computer flying; it's still the pilot who's flying, who's got purpose-built instruments that help the pilots to control what the plane is going to do. But it's like the computer aids the pilot through these interfaces that are purpose-built for different things that need to be done. Because if you wire the computer straight into the machine, you're going to have crashing planes. And I think because the plane is not going to be able to adapt the same way that the pilot is able to adapt to situations. Yeah. I think this is the same thing that APIs do, is that they take the information, they constrain it in a way to make it easier for people to interact with it and to do different new things with it. Unexpected things like unexpected conditions that pop up, and then to be able to react and to steer the organization to react to those conditions. And it's, I think that's what we're doing. I think it goes one step further still. I think that the ultimate goal of what we're doing is not even building APIs. It's building this interface infrastructure, like the information infrastructure that we're building now with APIs, and then a whole set of interfaces on top of it that we can reuse for different purposes. So that, especially like an organization like Lufthansa that has different organizations under the same flag, you get more reuse between different groups. Like you have standardized APIs that make it easier to have more reuse, but then also you have different interfaces that have been built on top of those APIs for specific purposes that are findable and discoverable throughout the organization. And this is the interface program, as I started calling it, that I think what we are really doing, so that we can automate the interaction that people have with organizations, that we don't have to talk with people in the organization to get something done, that we can interact with the machine directly in a bunch of different places wherever it makes sense, however it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm seeing is that when a traditional business sets about to implement an API program, and they've been reading in CIO magazine or something about needing to digitally transform their company. The first thing that I think they're thinking about is cost savings. They're thinking about automating things, making these connecting to systems to make them more real time. But it strikes me that the cost savings that they might not be thinking of is, for my entire career, business managers have been looking for fungible resources. That is, an engineer who could work on any part of the system anywhere, that you didn't have the need for specialists, and this idea of reusable code. And with an API program, you are kind of doing that in a way. You're giving people reusable code because you're providing an interface to it. so that people can make interesting things, and that makes you less dependent on a specialist. But to me, that's probably a good place for them to be starting from. But the real value that I think a lot of them are missing, that we really want to help show a path to, is that innovation that Kristof was talking about. The idea that by doing this, you're going to solve problems that haven't yet been thought of, or someone is going to create solutions. And that starts opening up new value. In many cases, you've got new products that are being created that just didn't exist before. So it's not just about cost savings. It's really about
new business models.
I mean, it's about the capabilities that you make available, right? Not just data, but also capabilities. I mean, there's one story. I've seen this somewhere. I don't really know if it is true or not. I like to think it is. So, but if it's not, I mean, I hope the listeners do not crucify me. But I mean, Uber, for example, they have also APIs, right? And we think about Uber as a means to transport people. But actually, if we think about capabilities, it's more or less about logistics, right? And this is a story that I heard, and I want to think it is true, is that flowers.com, they were using the Uber APIs to track their delivery trucks. So you take this capability it can be used in many different ways, and then you just use it to your needs. And it doesn't have to be exactly like the people that design it, they thought about it, but you have new possibilities, new things, and you can expand a lot on top of that.
You had a story about this, not like you told us before we started recording. You told us a story about reuse already that you have.
It was like in a project, one area of Lufthansa was deciding to create just an interface for vouchers. And this came to our hands, and we see it and we say, wow, that has a lot of possibilities. Imagine vouchers, how many things you can do that, and if we expose it. So it was like, as you say, how many surprises we could have is we just create something here and see what happens. So we began to talk about that voucher thing. And when later, funny, so they built something. It was not as much as we wanted, but it's okay. It was the beginning of the idea, no? And then suddenly, and this was in not COVID times. It was like in good times, at least economically and for airlines. And suddenly this COVID came across, and suddenly everybody have tickets and they couldn't fly, and they have a huge problem there. And of course, you have to talk with your customers and giving them like a reason how they could do with the flight they have it, and the, political reasons they don't let it travel, also healthy reasons, so not only politicals. So, and then they have to find a way to how we can interact with the customers and bringing back some value to them, that they don't think they lose their money on that. And this voucher idea suddenly comes like more to life. And because it was there, it was thinking before, and that it could come to life more faster than if it hasn't been thought before.
So you basically, you were able to reuse the voucher API that you had built before Corona to issue the vouchers during the Corona crisis.
Some parts of that.
That's very cool.
The fact that it existed and it was built in a certain way kind of made it easier and faster to adapt.
So I think that brings us back to purpose. I think I have the answer then. It's that the API needs to have its own purpose. It has to have the purpose in itself. So because if the purpose is either the unit that is communicating outwards and it's too much internal, so if the purpose is too much internal to the team that is generating the API, you end up with something that is, not going to be reusable as much. Or if the purpose is too much external facing, then you end up with an end consumer interface that is only able to do one single thing. It's like a one-trick pony. So I think the key is that the API needs to have its own purpose in itself. Probably that is the answer.
For me, it's like the purpose is the way it begins. You know, like if you begin to create something because of purpose, you begin to create something, but you never know if that is the real final purpose of the API, because probably other persons see it, find another purpose to your API. But the good is because you give it a purpose in the first action, then you create something, and then you give a chance for others to create other purpose based on your own thing. So it's more co-creating ones into each other.
And in the end, it's a bit going to the idea of the API as a product, right? I mean, if you talk about product management, you always start with what is the problem we want to solve? What is a problem that our customers have that we can help them easing this pain, right? So that is the purpose of the API, solving the consumer's problems. And then it can evolve from there.
I'm just sitting here trying to think of just how much value could be unlocked if people made the jump from this idea that APIs are about cost savings and integrations to the idea of really embracing the possibility of innovation. I've spent time thinking about models of innovation, and there are so few things that are truly completely new that don't build on something else. It's always, most of the innovation that I'm familiar with is where someone took ideas from one place and ideas from another place and brought them together. And so there's just so much value there. And it's like, how do we get people to think about it that way and to tell the story that way?
For me, as I told you, it's like just begin with something and then let it flow, let it evolve, let it flourish by itself, because you don't have to think all the purpose that your API is. You just take one, bring it to life, and then let others see it. And that probably will inspire others to bring more things to what you already bring. Put the foundations.
This reminds me a lot of self-organizing teams and like the evolutionary purpose as one of the ways that self-organizing teams evolve, is that basically you need one fixed identity to start, but then that identity does not remain fixed. Like it needs to be temporarily, like in time, it needs to be continuous. So at any given time, you need to have a stable point. But it's the way we walk, like we walk by falling. But at any given time point, we are still standing. So like we're constantly evolving and changing. And I guess that's also what this brings it back to that philosophy part that got me so excited about talking to you.
And why we get together, yes, it was because of that. Promise, I was really thrilled about seeing another person get into this. Yeah, excited about that.
So Flavio, can you tell maybe a little bit more about some of the writing that you've done? Like which one of because you've done some thought pieces that I saw passing by on LinkedIn over the last probably year or so. Like which ones were the ones that really inspired you the most?
Well, that's a very good question. I would say actually maybe one of the last ones, because actually it came also from a conversation with you and this biology and cell concept, right? Because I obviously am very interested in this API management topic, but I find it very connected to other topics like agile. For example, when we're talking about products, you mentioned self-organizing teams. Start with a purpose, start with an API, and then evaluate how the customers are receiving this product and adapt. And so build, test, adapt, and always keep doing that. But I think it also can and it will end up affecting a lot of organizations. From what I see and also what I speak with other people, big organizations are still very organized in silos, right? And you don't have people talking with each other. And I've been thinking that if you pick this cell idea, right, and you have these self-organizing teams which have their own purpose, like you have the body, you have the kidney, you have the heart, you have each one with its own purpose, and they can interact with each other via APIs, and in the end they will work together to make the body work, right? So APIs, I think they can really help on this, on the communication inside the companies, if we see it in that way. But to achieve it, you have to organize the company in a certain way, right? You have to have these agile teams, self-organizing, which understand what they are doing and have their own purpose. We always end up on the purpose. And that was a very nice article. I liked writing it.
But purpose is what makes life.
Yeah.
Purpose is I read this book, Neither Ghost Nor Machine, that changed a lot of my thinking. It was really, it's Terence Deacon. He's a professor in US. He wrote a book that was really hard to understand, and I couldn't dig my way through, which is like, huh. And then his friend, he wrote a more accessible book about the same topic. And they talk about like the gap, like the living systems have this, it's not about the things that are there. It's about the constraints that create a space for something free to evolve and grow and change. And it's the gap that makes living systems. And the purpose is in that gap. Like you can't clearly define purpose because it's constantly evolving and changing. But the purpose is constrained by the people and the things that are there. And so it's like a self-perpetuating tornado or something like that. It's like very, very similar, where energy is flowing through it, but it's constantly evolving and changing so that it could stay, like, it could stay alive a little bit longer. And I think that's an interesting, I think similar things also apply to product teams. Similar things apply to companies or groups of people. Like we try to perpetuate our being together and what we're doing together. So yeah, it's just really interesting. So
I like that evolving thing. It's like, yes, you began with something and then you evolve, and let's see, keep on living.
Yeah. The moment you stop, that's the end.
I'm imagining now you going off and building an API catalog for some biological system, like the Human Genome Project is followed by the Human API Project.
I guess, yeah. But the genes are very similar. There are constraints. Like there's nowhere in the cell it says like do this, then do that. There's no recipe in the cell for a living system. There's just like points at which something is changed. Like oh, it feels like we're like when the embryo is growing. Like oh, it feels like we're quite a lot right now. So maybe it's time to start splitting and start making a neural cord. And it's not that that organism knows that it needs to build a human. It just has a couple of instructions at just the right time, and it just constrains it just enough so that the end result, it becomes this evolving, changing thing. And it's just fascinating. It's incredibly fascinating.
But
it's magical.
It's also interesting, right? I mean, the nature also has this experimental and adapt factor, right? I mean, you see the mutations in the cells. I mean, the COVID, I think they have already, I don't know how many thousand mutations that they have detected. And some of those work, some of those don't work. If they don't work, then they disappear. If it works, the body, the cell, the whatever, it's better adapted to the environment.
And if you give it long enough, it will even co-evolve with humanity, and it will become a disease that doesn't kill us or almost doesn't kill us. So it's only now killing us because it's not really adapted to us yet. Because it's not good for the virus to kill us, because then it loses a host.
Yep. Then it dies. Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. But that is the thing. You put some constraints, and the way that you break that constraints helps you also to keep on living and create. Like it sounds like you begin with some constraints, and then you break that constraints to try to keep on living more and more in a different way, or ways that you never thought.
Sometimes you end up at a dead-end street and you have to break constraints, or you're not going to make it. So I think, yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing about entrepreneurship also is I think every single crisis that, as an entrepreneur, business crisis and personal crisis are very close. And every single major crisis I've gone through has transformed me just as much as it transformed the business. And I think it's, evolutionary purpose.
I heard I think it was in the economical crisis 1 decade ago. I heard someone saying something like, whenever someone is crying, someone else is selling the tissues. I mean, every crisis is an opportunity, and you have to look for those and take them and see what happens.
What's even better if somehow you figure out during your own crisis, like how you're going to become a better person, not just somebody else selling you the tissues.
But also this comes to the point that let's use it. Probably this is what we needed in the world to happen, to begin to see APIs as a helper and not just a convenience things to have in the business. It's more like, how can I evolve more with these APIs that help me to go to different places and keep on going and keep on moving. So I don't know.
Every crisis is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Every the obstacle is the road. It shows us all our growth in our business was because of major crises.
The same in a personal level. Also.
Yeah, also in the same in personal levels. Yeah. As long as it doesn't kill us, it's going to make us stronger. So that's for sure.
Yeah.
This has been a really great discussion. Thank you both so much for joining us today and sharing your time with us. I'm looking at the clock, and I know we have to wrap up. Well, first off, I just want to remind people, go check out developer.lufthansa.com. Check out their APIs. If you'd like to give feedback, there's a support email link there to give some feedback and give some inspiration to Ainhoa and Flavio and the team there. Is there anything that you guys would like to say to kind of end on?
In general terms, it's like this purpose thing. I hope that it's a chain of mind that is coming more to everyone in business. So they began to think like now the APIs is playing a big role, and not just APIs interfaces, APIs more like with a purpose, with the opportunity to bring new ideas and find new ways to do things different. And of course, all the other things that APIs brings, like sharing, cooperation, and making things fast and easier, but more like these opportunities to grow in a ways that we don't even know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, API management, APIs it's always mentioned every time someone talks about digital transformation. But just like digital transformation is not so much about digital, right? It's not so much about technology. Technology is a tool, and it's more about solving people's problems. And if we can see it in that way, I mean, if we solve people's problems, we are going to do something good, I hope. And APIs are a tool to help us achieve that.
Amen to that.
Yeah. This was a really interesting discussion. Purpose, innovation, constraints, really great stuff. I wish you great success in your API program there. And I'd love to touch base with you sometime in the future to see how it's going, see how things develop.
Yes, please. And thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for having us here, and also looking forward to see the next sessions of this podcast. It's very interesting. I'm really looking forward.
And inspiring and bringing new ideas, by the way. So keep on going, please.
Thank you. To our audience, we hope this is helpful to you and that you've enjoyed this. Please leave us feedback. You can send it to info@pronovix.com. Thank you for listening to the API Resilience podcast. If you liked what you heard, please follow us to hear our latest episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. And if you have any comments or feedback you would like to share, please drop us an email at podcasts@pronovix.com. Until next time, we wish you well and hope you find success in all your endeavors.